open, honest and spiritual manner, and it's a set of guidelines. So really when you say Islam and Jordan Peterson, what they're both trying to achieve is to give people that, it's a guideline for life. And so really, them criticising each other is kind of wrong because they're almost coming from the same position.
You're absolutely right about that, and I'll tell you, just to add to that, I'll say just to add to that, man, I'll say to you that what's ironic about Jordan Peterson's perspective is that he's simply secularized religion. I'll tell you what I mean by that. He tries to give people meaning in their life. He gives, if you look at his book and if you look at what he says in his lectures, I would say the centerpiece of his philosophy, really, if you like, is finding meaning. Let's give people meaning. What kind of meaning? You've got to look at this, you've got to be introspective, you've got to do that, you've got to have challenges, you've got to do this, you've got to be disciplined, all these kinds of things, which religion had a full-time institutionalized. As a nominal Christian, I find it difficult to believe that someone like him wouldn't have been able to extrapolate that from the Bible, for instance. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that, what I'm saying generally is this: a lot of his values, ironically, is actually in line with the Islamic principle.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying.
That's
kind of
he was online. He's talking in I think it was Vice News or something like this, and he was talking to like an Asian guy.
I've seen the interview.
That interview, right? And he was talking about, for example, women being a distraction in the workplace.
And like what they wear. So it's like you wear high heels and are you going into the workplace to be provocative?
So what's the solution? I mean, if you take what he's saying to its philosophical extreme, then what you're saying is let women cover up. That's effectively what you're saying. So if you're saying that you're in line and agreement with Islam, I think he doesn't want to. He must not be as ignorant as not to know that it's Muslim women, for example, cover up. He must know that his philosophy, a lot of the time, is in line with Islamic traditionalism.
Because it's quite, well, that's it. And this is another thing. It's quite a traditional. He does have quite a traditional view of society, whereby women come into the workplace and they're dressed in any way that they can, dress however you want, but they're coming in and what reaction does that provoke? And there are so many similarities in what he's saying, the guidelines that he's given to various religions, Islam being one. But I think one of the questions that we've got to ask is that why did we let it get to a situation, not in Islam, in Muslim culture, Islamic culture, why did we let it get to a situation in Western society where young men have to look to an individual like Jordan Peterson to be told pretty basic things that they should work hard, they should keep their own house in order, they shouldn't be, let's say, depressed and caught up in the world. Why is it that society has failed a generation of individuals that Jordan Peterson has to come along and state the obvious?
Well, the reason why, in my opinion, is because now the economic system, as well as the philosophical or societal normative position, seems to be, like we say, a liberal one. So both, and this is quite, it compounds, I believe, the situation when you have an economy which is in line with the social philosophy. So we have fiscal and social liberalism at play. And what that means is, literally, desires or materialism become the aim, the goal of the American dream, consumption. And unfortunately, human beings, psychologically, he knows as a psychologist, do not find satiation. They do not find any kind of, I'm not going to use the word spiritual, but psychological satisfaction, meaning, from that kind of life.
What you get from consumption is you get an instant gratification when you buy something, but then if you engage in that, all you're ever going to do is you're going to compare yourself to other people, and you're going to look at what other people have, and it's a zero-sum game. It's never going to be enough, and so you get caught up in this endless cycle. This endless cycle of materialism and consumption, and rather than being grateful for what you have, gratitude is a very important thing. And the simplest things that you have in life, you should appreciate them. You should be thankful for them. And the problem is when you engage in this consumption-driven economy, you're always pegging yourself against somebody else and what somebody else has, and you're never going to be happy with what you have yourself. And so you just go round and around and around in circles. And that's why we see, suicide rates at an all-time high. Mental health is such a big issue. All of these things that are
you're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right about all of that. So generally, I would say to someone like Jordan Peterson, or someone like Sargon and Akkad, that let's accept your argument as a valid one. Only under the condition that you tell me why philosophical liberalism is true. If it's not true and you cannot prove it to be an objective truth, there is no use of using it as a presupposition of your arguments. And if you use it as a presupposition of your arguments, you have to justify why you're using it as a presupposition of your arguments without proving it. Now, that would be the kind of the bottom line, if you like. I would put to them. If they can't prove that philosophical liberalism is a truism, is actually a truth with a capital T, there's no use in what you're doing is you're making comparisons between Islam and liberalism. I would agree with a lot of your comparisons, actually. I would say to them, I'd agree with a lot of your comparisons. In fact, most of them. To be totally honest with you, a lot of them are true. You're not uninformed. You're actually informed on certain issues. My question that follows is, so what? If the Prophet Muhammad instructed through what we say is divine commandment people to do things which were illiberal?
Well, so this is one of the things that people don't understand about Islam, and for the record, I'm not Muslim, I'm not really a religious person. They don't understand that there's, one of the biggest things in Islam is that there's no compulsion in religion. If you don't believe it, it's not going to be forced upon you. If you choose to believe individuals that jump on religious movies and they say, Islam is going to take over British culture, they're going to repopulate the UK and all these things, if you choose to believe that, then that's your personal choice. That's not a fact. You can come into this corner and you can speak to Muslims.
I'd say something else as well. There's two things, and this is very important for Western academics to understand. We've accepted and agreed that classically, using the tradition, there is definitely what we call Dawah, or literal statements which indicate to a kind of expansionism. I would say it is a kind of expansionism if we looked at it from a strictly political perspective. But there's something important that needs to be taken into consideration, which is what we refer to as usul. Usul al-fiqh, which is the principles of jurisprudence, is a whole subfield in Islamic sciences which tells Muslims or instructs them or gives them guidance on basically how to extrapolate jurisprudent principles. So for instance, there's another subgroup which is fiqh al-aqalliyat, what minorities of Western societies, for example, must do. Or not Western society, any society, minority Muslims. If you have minority Muslims, will they act in the same way as if you have majority Muslims? These are very important questions because really I think this is a red herring. The truth of the matter is this. We've already agreed that some of their arguments are valid considering a presupposition of philosophical liberalism. I will say to them now that actually to conflate that with the position of Muslim minorities in the Western Hemisphere in particular is an egregious mistake. And the reason why I would say that is the case is because the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran, the Sunnah, tells Muslims how to act when they're in a position of strength. I'm going to say this completely candidly, honestly, and how to act when they're in a position of weakness. And the position of weakness is when they are literally outnumbered. Number one, fiqh al-aqalliyat, or they don't have the ability to implement God's law. They don't have it. I can only implement, me personally, can only implement God's law on myself, potentially on my family. But let's say me, that's really all I can do. I don't believe in the day of judgment I'm going to be questioned for me personally, for why you went to Britain.
It's like, why didn't you convert?
Exactly. And the Quran says, وَلَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُصَيْتِرٍ. You're not over them a compeller.
You've got to lead by example. It's like anything else in life.
So I would say to them, they have to differentiate, and this is a very important. I want them to really learn this from me. I'm not saying that I'm going to be their teacher, but hopefully they listen to this. I want them to differentiate between what Islam civilizationally, because Islam can be used, and we don't want to equivocate. Islam can be used as a name of a religion, but also a civilization. Historically, that's how it's been. How Islam operates when it's in a position of strength, as compared to how Muslims operate when they are being when, let's say, for example, they are minorities in a Western place. Oh, that's different. Minority group. They're outnumbered and they have nothing. So they have no ability to implement God's law. So in that situation, where the latter is the case, they have to understand that there is concession. And in both cases, people don't understand this. There is a kind of pluralism in Islam, I believe. And I'm not saying the pluralism, once again, that's strictly linked to the philosophical liberalism. But there is a kind of, what that pluralism is that within the Islamic model where Islam or Muslims are in charge, there are parallel systems of government and judiciary. So, for example, the Quran says, فَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْإِنْجِيلِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ. That let the people of the Injil, in Surah Al-Ma'idah chapter 5, the Quran says that let the people of the Injil, let them do hukum, which means ruling, with what Allah has revealed in their books. In other words, at the time of Umar and the caliphs and all these things, Christians were allowed to rule by their book, Jews were allowed to rule by their book, etc., etc. So in other words, there are parallel systems operating in the same place, and that goes under like Ikrah fi Din. There's no compulsory religion, and that's where there is a big overlap between philosophical liberalism and Islam, which, to be fair, they don't address. They've never addressed this, because if they want to have a fair academic analysis, they have to say, okay, well, in Islam, if you're making a comparison, even if you're making a comparison between Islam and philosophical liberalism, you have to say similarities and difference. They emphasize difference. I'm saying let's emphasize both. That's how you make it fair. There is difference, and a lot of their work emphasizes that difference. Similarity is there is a pluralism that works within the Islamic framework. One, which I've just explained. Number two, that people are not compelled to become Muslims. Number three, that minority Muslims are asked to behave in a different way to majority Muslims. In other words, what happens with the minority is different to what happens with the majority. And with these similarities, I personally believe, using those kinds of usul, if you like, which are principles, you can bridge a gap, and there can be coexistence. Where it seems what now the ultra-right are trying to say is that actually you can't make that happen. What we're saying is,
because
okay.
One of the things that they do is that the far right, or identity politics, ambassadors, whatever you want to call them. What is it, like generation identity? Those guys, what they'll try and do is they'll try and say that there's compulsion in religion. Islam is going to be forced upon you, it's going to be forced upon your society. They don't actually take the time to speak with Muslims, don't take the time to learn about Islam, and they use as a reference point examples that the mainstream media will show of people that have probably misunderstood or misinterpreted Islam, and they're using it to, let's say, fight a war or a battle or try and establish an Islamic state, for example, when you know and I know that that's not who they are.
Exactly. So I think it's been fruitful from that angle that we discuss these things, because I think they're societal things now which are being thrown around. But we don't, as Muslims, have a chance to come forward and say, look, well, actually, this is how we should be conceptualizing it. There's truth in what you say. We're not saying that those guys don't have any truth in what they say. Of course there's truth. There's valid arguments they're making. But there's a difference between a valid argument in deduction and a sound argument. But in this case, there's a difference between a valid argument according to their own premise and a true argument according to the actual word intrinsically true. True with a capital T. So I think that's where the differentiation could be made. But generally speaking, I would say to anyone that has or that is influenced by their philosophy, to think twice about both the similarities and differences, to look at the intricacies and the nuances that are involved, because I don't think they do that. It's very easy to look at the verse in the Quran that says, fight the disbelievers or the polytheists all together, just like they fight you all together. Even the verse itself kind of...
in the context of war, isn't it?
Yeah, they're fighting you, you fight them. But it's easy to look at those things, Look,
Jordan Peterson has a point about that. In one of his lectures, he talks about it's not necessarily being an aggressive person, but it's about having the capacity, the trait of character, to be able to be, to have that streak in you. Whereas if somebody does attack you, whether in the workplace or personally or physically, to have the capacity to fight back.
He talks about agreeability.
Agreeability and being disagreeable. And it's all, again, it's pretty much the same thing. It's a message that's just, worded differently and in a different context. And so I think what people should do is they should look at the individuals that they're aligning themselves with and then say, okay, so why am I doing this? And is there a similarity between the decision that I'm making and the rule book that I'm adhering to and the rule book that these individuals are adhering to? And I think that when people actually look at it objectively and look at the truth, as you say, they'll notice that there aren't really that many differences. And also take the time to speak to the people that you think sort of have it in for you, that you think are trying to take over your culture and society. Come to speak school and speak to people. Don't just say, okay, I saw this video of this person saying that Islam is going to ruin British culture. First of all, what is British culture? I think that British culture is it's a contribution of many different factors.
Yes.
Islam included in that, whether that's the food that you eat around the corner from here, or all these different things. But actually take the time to speak to Muslims, read about Islam.
But they have to understand one thing. This is a very good point. This is actually a claim they make quite often. It's a blanket claim. They say Islam is an infringement on British culture, French culture, whatever European culture. I'll say to them, be careful, because I'll say to them, Islam manifested in which way? Islam is not. Islam has an inbuilt flexibility, as we've said, It's chameleon-like in many of its rulings. It's more suited in many cases to what's referred to in philosophy as situational ethics than, for example, like Kantian universalism, for example, Because Kantian universalism is the idea that whatever applies, have a law for yourself as you would want for the whole of society, right?
It's like to treat others as you
like
you wish to be treated.
That's
yourself.
a kind of you can break it down like that. Some have objected to that way of reducing it, but let's, for the sake of argument, just say treat others like you. He has a whole formula, Kant. But Islam is not in line with Kantian universalism, and it's not fully in line with situational ethics. But it does have what is called usul. So when they say Islam, what do they mean? Do they mean Islam manifested in a civilizational sense? Because I would agree that Islam manifested in a civilizational sense if in the context of the international relations sphere, it would be competitive to the philosophical liberalism and those states. I'm not going to say it would be, I say it should be. It should be competitive in its truth, in its competition for truth, as any state that claims that liberalism or socialism, Marxism, whatever is true. That's true. Accept it. But Islam manifested on a societal level where Muslims are the minority isn't. Because for example, we have simple examples. The Prophet Muhammad, in the beginning of the prophecy and migration and things like that, he instructed Muslims to go to Abyssinia. And he said about it that there are some people, there's a king there, and Najashi, his name is, who is Adil, who is a just ruler, but he was a Christian ruler, but he still described him with justice. The reason why is because he wanted people to realize that actually you've got to treat these people, you're not going to try and take over his land. He didn't go and say, okay, well, why don't you, as 30 people, in a country probably of, let's say, at least 100,000, 200,000, whatever the population of that time was, in Abyssinia, a million even, go and try and take over. He didn't instruct them to do that, because the idea was, look, we understand that we need your protection. And we understand that in order for the protection to be granted, there needs to be coexistence. And even if we were in control, we would give you protection. Yet there is a discussion, a discourse, a competition for the truth claims that we're both making.
So a word that you use there, coexistence, and what you were talking about, talking about infringement. So Islam is an infringement of British culture. I think that one of the things that these nationalists have is that nationalists have, far-right individuals, identity people have, is they'll talk about infringement of Islam on British culture, but they turn a blind eye to the bigger picture. And you can say, so somebody who's British, you look at our history and the way in which we've infringed on other cultures, through our colonies and.
Yeah, and that's where we should really be talking. And I'll tell you why. Alexis de Tocqueville, he wrote a book called Democracy in America. It's a very interesting book, but also very powerful in the way he makes his argument. And one of the things that he says, he actually makes a comparison between the shuhada or the martyrs of Islam and what he refers to as the martyrs of liberalism. And he says democracy was, the martyrs of liberalism are everywhere, and democracy has been spread in a very expansionist way, and he talks about how it's comparable to the expansionism of, for example, Islam. Now the point is, this is what we need to do. We need to judge people on the standards they set for themselves. Let me say this one more time. We need to judge people on the standards they set for themselves. You're a vegan.
I am.
If you go and eat, Burger King or something, I see you eat, I say, listen, man, what's happened?
It wouldn't be appropriate for me to go in there.
Yeah, for you, because you've set a principle for yourself, and now your principle is, I'm not going to eat meat for what do you call it, for
I
ideological
mean, for me, it's
reasons.
for health reasons, but I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, you've got the positive externalities of not eating meat as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all
Whatever it
these
may be,
different reasons.
even if it is for moral reasons, yeah? So fine, but you set a principle and you contradict the principle. That's called self-reflection. So you have something which you can